Good evening, this is the NewsTrack and I'm Marya Shakil. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro has once again provoked India, calling it shameful to see the country align with authoritarian dictators like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. He claimed India is doing so to secure discounted crude oil from Russia. In a sharp counter, former US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in fact accused Donald Trump of jeopardizing long-standing US-India relations to serve his family interests, the business interest of the Trump family in Pakistan. But Trump has fired back, accusing India of maintaining one-sided trade ties, imposing the highest tariffs in the world and blocking American businesses while continuing to buy most of its oil and weapons from Russia. Remember, all this comes in the wake of a powerful imagery which has captured the global attention that emerged from the SCO. Xi Jinping, Narendra Modi and Vladimir Putin sharing an image of bonhomie. Now, the trade talks. Delhi, of course, is maintaining its stand that it is open, strategic, and at the same time unapologetically independent. India is not choosing sides, but whether Washington is misreading the moment is the question. Tonight on NewsTrack, we are being joined by top geopolitical experts to decode the future of the India-US partnership amidst rising tensions and Trump's tariff threats. And let me go straight to Chicago, where Professor John Mearsheimer joins us. John Mearsheimer is a leading American international relations expert and professor of political science at the University of Chicago. And he has termed the Trump administration's India policy a colossal blunder and asserted that secondary tariffs on India for buying Russian oil won't work. Professor Mearsheimer, President Trump and his trade advisor have accused India for directly supporting Russia's geopolitical ambitions through its oil imports and have gone on to criticize Prime Minister Modi's cooperation with Putin and Xi Jinping at the SCO summit, calling it detrimental to US interests. How do these accusations in fact now fit into the ongoing trade talks between the two nations? And is Donald Trump jeopardizing 25-year-old carefully crafted relations between the two democracies, something that former NSA Jake Sullivan spoke about?
Well, I think there's no question that President Trump has done a great deal of damage to U.S.-Indian relations. What's quite paradoxical here is that in his first term as president, he did a lot to improve U.S.-Indian relations. And at the beginning of his second term earlier this year, when Prime Minister Modi visited the White House, it looked like U.S.-Indian relations were just going to get even better. But in recent months, what has happened is that President Trump has taken a number of measures that have basically sabotaged those relations, and the United States and India are at loggerheads today.
And Professor, the SCO summit at Tianjin emphasized enhanced regional security, economic integration, and cooperation as alternatives to Western-led global order. How does India's active participation in the SCO challenge the United States' leverage in trade talks? And to what extent do you see tariffs being used as a coercive tool in this larger strategic rivalry now?
Well, there's no question that tariffs are being used as a coercive tool. The reason that the Trump administration has slapped 50% tariffs on India is in large part due to the fact that the Indians are still trading with the Russians. They're importing Russian oil. And this makes the Trump administration very angry. It's important to understand that the Trump administration has no real leverage against Russia.
Okay.
And because the United States has been supporting Ukraine in that war, it will be a humiliating blow for the United States. And this is to say, it'll be a humiliating blow for the Trump administration if Russia wins that war. So, what the Trump administration is doing is desperately searching for some sort of instrument to put pressure on the Russians to get the Russians to compromise. And the only instrument they seem to think that they have available at this point in time is putting tariffs on India and getting India to break off its relations with the Russians. In other words, to stop importing Russian oil. But this is not going to work. And all it's going to do is worsen relations between the United States and India. And this is certainly not in America's strategic interest. So, what the Trump administration is trying to do to rescue the situation in Ukraine by punishing India is going to backfire. We're going to lose in Ukraine anyway. And furthermore, we're going to end up alienating India and pushing India closer to Russia. And we're going to end up pushing India closer to China. This is not in our strategic interest.
Yes.
And this is why what President Trump is doing is a colossal blunder.
Okay. Given the Trump administration's framing of the US-India trade relationship as a totally one-sided disaster, and Donald Trump himself took to Truth Social to say so, and the subsequent steep tariffs, to what extent do you see this economic conflict reflecting an underlying power struggle consistent with your own thesis that great powers seek to limit peer competitors' rise?
Well, I don't think the United States is interested in preventing the rise of India. In fact, I think the United States has a vested interest in seeing India grow more powerful, just like it has a vested interest in seeing good relations between the United States and India. And this is in large part due to the fact that the United States considers China to be its principal adversary, and it has a deep-seated interest in having a powerful India help to check China's ambitious agenda in Asia. So from a strategic point of view, the United States has a powerful set of incentives to work with India to help make India more powerful. With regard to the economic relations, there's no question, I think most Indians recognize this, that there were economic problems that had to be fixed. And India was going to have to make some concessions. And people were talking about this in the spring and last winter of this year. So people recognize the economic problem that exists, the trade imbalance, for example, certain Indian tariffs that were bothering the Americans. But it looked like the Indians and the Americans were going to be able to work out a deal.
Okay.
These were not insurmountable problems. What I'm saying is that the economic problems, which were clearly there, were not insurmountable. But what happened is other political considerations got in the way, starting with Trump's claim that he settled the India-Pakistan conflict in the spring of this year, and then the whole issue of sanctions because India was continuing to import Russian oil. So that economic problem that could have been solved has not been solved, but not because of the economic problems per se, but because of subsequent political problems that arose.
Okay, Professor Mearsheimer, considering accusations that the US tariff policy under Trump was influenced by personal and political agendas, and as you said, the ceasefire claims by Donald Trump himself, how should, do you think it's domestic politics in great powers which actually tends to distort or complicate the power struggles and negotiations, especially in the context of what is an evolving situation, an evolving US-India trade deal, and particularly about the strategic relationship as well in the backdrop of the SCO summit?
Well, I actually don't see domestic politics mattering much in terms of U.S.-India relations. I think most Americans have very positive attitudes towards Indians. Uh, there are lots of Indians who live in the United States who are on college campuses, and they're highly regarded, highly respected. So I don't see any domestic agenda at play here in the United States. I think one could argue that the economic problems that we discussed before mattered somewhat from a domestic point of view. But again, those problems were surmountable. I think the real problem here has to do with Trump's personality and the fact that he had to brag that he settled the India Pakistan crisis and that he deserved a Nobel Prize and that he was greatly appreciative of Pakistan for nominating him for a Nobel Prize and hoped that India would do the same. Those sorts of things started to poison the relationship between India and the United States in the spring. And then you have the geopolitical issue of India importing Russian oil, really complicating matters. But I don't see domestic politics as an issue here.
Okay, Professor Mearsheimer, just a couple of more questions here, sir. Do you think that the Trump administration miscalculated India's response? Because India so far has chosen not to respond to the belligerence of the United States. There is caution, there is measure in which India has responded.
I think there's no question he miscalculated. It was a huge mistake on his part. He's now created a world in which we, the United States, have pushed the Russians into the arms of the Chinese, and we're now pushing the Indians into the arms of the Chinese. This is not in America's strategic interest. America should have good relations with Russia, in fact, very good relations with Russia, and America should have very good relations with India. The fact that we don't, and the fact that Trump has greatly contributed to this situation, just shows you that he really doesn't know what he's doing.
Okay, is there a window of negotiation open here? Is there a possibility of some kind of resolution of this crisis?
Well, I think it largely depends on the United States and, in particular, President Trump. And the question you have to ask yourself is President Trump going to realize that he's made a huge blunder here? As you pointed out, I think quite correctly, there's no evidence that India is going to back off. And given that India is not going to back off, and it's not in our interest to see Modi, Xi, and Putin all smiling and shaking hands together, one would surmise that Trump is going to reverse direction and he's going to try to improve relations with India. There have been all sorts of reports here in the United States that President Trump has been trying to call Prime Minister Modi, but he can't get through to Prime Minister Modi. That indicates to me that maybe Trump wants to bury the hatchet, as we say, and restore good relations. I can't say that for certain, but maybe he's trying to do that. I would be surprised if he doesn't try to do that at some point in the near future, because again, it's in our strategic interest. But if he does that, the question then becomes, how will India react? And my sense is that the Indians will not go to great lengths to restore close relations with the United States. I think India now understands that you have to be very careful when you're dealing with the United States, especially when you're dealing with President Trump, and you don't want to get too close to the United States. You don't want to be too dependent on the United States. So my view is that even if President Trump reaches out to Prime Minister Modi, I think Prime Minister Modi, for smart reasons, will keep his distance.
All right, Professor John Mearsheimer, really appreciate your time. Thank you for speaking to India Today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Let's bring in our next newsmaker now. Dr. Mukesh Aghi joins us. Dr. Aghi, there have been several developments, almost a statement a day coming in from the Trump administration, from Donald Trump himself, to his trade advisor, Peter Navarro. When you look at these statements, Dr. Aghi, where is the trade talk really heading? Even when the signal that is coming in from the Commerce Ministry so far is that New Delhi believes that the communication channels are open.
Well, channels are open between the two countries, and both countries are talking to see where to find the common ground. I think Peter Navarro's comment on SCO and his comment on India buying oil from Brahmins is not positive. I think it's important that we maintain certain amount of decorum when you're dealing with two countries. But overall, I believe that the relationship continues to move in the right direction. Yes, there is some rhetoric, but we should learn to ignore that and not react to that because in every aspect, US companies are investing in India. We are seeing the trade going up. We are seeing people-to-people relationship moving along in a positive way. So I would say overall, with all the rhetoric coming in between the two countries, the relationship stands strong in every manner.
Okay, despite Donald Trump's claims of the US being the greatest victim of trade of India in this trade, the US trade deficit with India is $41.5 billion, which is significantly lower than with China or the European Union, Mexico. What drives this rather dramatization of the India-US trade relationship, and how should Indian policy makers and business leaders interpret it?
Well, I think you have to understand that India had a trade surplus with the US for around $40+ billion. And India was committed to buying more energy from the US to bring that trade deficit to even par. And that process was continuing. And suddenly we had through social comments coming from the president, then by Peter Navarro. Does that impact India? Yes, I'm seeing a lot of emotions here, but we are not seeing those emotions in the US arena. The companies are committed with India itself. They're looking at the investment, they're looking at the supply chain in every aspect. So I don't think there is much of an emotional impact we are seeing from the corporate America. But yes, here the media has gone into frenzy and reacting to every comments, every tweet coming in. But overall, I would say that India has reacted in a very, very dignified manner, trying to basically not react to some of the comments being made, keeping its focus down to maintaining the relationship and not dignifying some of the comments being made by people like Peter Navarro. So I think overall, with time, I would say emotions will come down and both sides will sit down and find a viable way to have a win-win value proposition between the two countries.
Okay, then what is the most realistic path for India to protect its sensitive sectors, like agriculture and dairy then?
Well, you have to understand, India was one of the first country to start negotiation with the Trump administration. And they basically were way ahead of everybody else. For whatever reason, the trade deal didn't close. I think it's important to understand that in that deal, what we are seeing is that India was able to protect some of the dairy side, some of the agriculture side, and you have to understand that certain red lines no political leadership can cross, and that is protecting the interest of the farmers. You have a country where almost 50% of the workforce works on the farm, and almost 14% of the GDP comes from that. So I think it is important that we have to explain to the negotiator, to the media, to the people in the US, why this is a red line. And it's not like protection, it's just trying to save the jobs and livelihood of the subsistence farmers in India. So I think more communication, both directly and through the media, will help.
And Dr. Aghi, former US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has accused President Donald Trump of jeopardizing America's ties with India to favor his family's business deals in Pakistan. He said, and I'm quoting him, on a bipartisan basis, going back decades, the United States has worked to build its relationship with India, the world's largest democracy, a country that we should be aligned with on technology, talent, and economics. And then he goes on to say, etc., etc. Do you see these comments can perhaps do some kind of, or should I say, force rethink in Trump administration?
Well, you have to understand that there were certain breakdown between the relationship between the two countries. One that happened in 1971, and then we had one after 1998. And then since then, President Clinton started the process, went down to President Bush, and onward. And so for the last 25 years, both countries have made effort to build a relationship, which is basically aligned geopolitically, economically, technological wise. We have over 300,000 students studying in America itself. And so in every aspect, the relationship was a win-win partnership. And the sudden, basically, social media messaging from President Trump did have an impact. And then suddenly you have a 25% tariff followed by a second tariff of 25%. It does put pressure on the relationship, especially in India, and also for the American companies, because you have to understand a lot of American companies are manufacturing components here for their global supply chain. Now they will have to pay 50% a tariff on those goods, and it makes their goods not cost effective. But at the same time, you have garment workers, you have jewelry workers, you have leather workers, and our estimate is that this impacts roughly 5 million jobs in India. So I think it is important that we are able to work and find the right positioning with the Trump administration, so there's a reasonable, acceptable tariff between the two countries, and so we can move forward.
Now, coming to that statement of Modi's war, Dr. Aghi, how valid is this criticism in light of similar purchases by many other nations? And what are the implications for US-India bilateral relations then?
Well, I think the comments saying that this is Modi's war is incorrect. This is not India's war. There's no India's dog in this fight between Ukraine and Russia. Yes, with Biden administration, India was in fact coaxed into saying, hey, go buy a certain price point Russian oil. That's going to take the pressure off across the world and price point for the rest of the world itself. So on that basis, India moved ahead and started procuring Russian oil. Yes, China buys much more. When you look at European Union, their purchase of LNG coming in from Russia is in value much more itself. Yes, US has imported basically fertilizer and other aspect of goods from Russia. So I think to basically point the finger at India, I think is not right and incorrect. And it does have an impact on the sentiment and on the relationship. But I think what we have seen is substantial amount of maturity coming out of India, not reacting to those accusations, keeping his head down and trying to find avenues to keep on building the relationship. So I think to summarize, I think it's unfortunate those comments were made and they were inappropriate.
And given the actual numbers for US trade deficits with major partners, China $270 billion, European Union $161 billion, Mexico at $157 billion, etc., etc., why does the US political narrative so frequently then single out India? And what impact do you think it'll have on trade negotiations?
Well, I don't know why India is being picked up, because yes, China, Canada, Mexico, others have a much bigger trade surplus with the US. Yes, US would like to bring that surplus down, and that's the whole objective is put in tariffs so you can bring the surplus, it's a deficit, US deficit on the trade side further down itself. Um, India gets uh, basically uh, pointed by the trade negotiator, but more from the White House. And I think that's not healthy because it just kind of leaves a bad taste among the negotiator that if you're talking a trade deal between the two countries and you start throwing in some of the social media, true, I mean, so on the Truth Social also, talking about that India is fueling the Russian war, I think that does not help. And it is important that we just basically, as India has done rightly, ignore it, stay focused, and then get the trade deal done.
In terms of timeline, where do we stand in the India-US trade talks? How soon do you think it will materialize?
I think we have to get the temperature down. That's important. We have to get emotions out. And at the same time, see how fast we can move because you do have workers who are getting impacted. You have folks who are basically would like to keep on maintaining the supply chain between the two countries, both from the India side and both from the US side. I believe that sometime by October, November, we hope things will settle down and the secondary tariff on India is removed and the trade talk continues.
Okay. My last question then, Dr. Aghi. Do you think the trade talks will proceed only? Is there a condition, a possible condition that if United States decides to remove that punitive tariff of 25%, which is being called as Russia tariff?
I think it'll be helpful. I think it'll send a message that US is serious about trying to make a deal with India, just like with other countries. I think it also basically sends a message that the relationship is not just about tariff fear, or relationship is not just about leveraging India to put pressure on Putin itself. I think relationship is much broader and deeper, and it's important that we maintain the momentum on building this partnership, both for the near and the long term.
All right, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO of USISPF, thank you for speaking to India today and giving us clarity on the timeline that India-US are looking at with regards to the trade talks. That's all from me on this edition of the News Track. I'll be seeing you tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching.